Welcome to 906 Outdoors. We're spending some time with Bernie the Beekeeper to find out what it takes to raise bees. We'll start with some techniques for keeping bees alive over the winter and follow the process through until we end up with delicious honey in a jar. And a look at voles. So sit back, put your feet up and the remote down. It's time for 906 Outdoors. 9 million acres of forest, 1,700 miles of continuous shoreline, 4,300 lakes, 12,000 miles of streams, more than 300 waterfalls, 15 counties, 2 time zones, and 1 area code. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula. Welcome to 906 Outdoors. UP winters can take their toll on many a critter, big and small, including bees. But there are ways to help cut down on winter losses.
Most beekeepers keep their bees in a single colony and they wrap them.
Problem solved? Maybe not.
In the last few years, we've had a lot of bees dying out over the winter, so we've come up with variations to that. A member of our club, Northwoods Beekeepers, for 5 years has been keeping his bees in a styrofoam box, where it is different. The big difference is that we are able to, by taking the lid off, we go down and check on the bees, can actually see them, and we can feed them without disturbing them. Conventional beekeeping, you have to disturb them by opening the boxes, and here it's all done already. So this works out real good. This has 3 vents on it. 2 are closed and 2 are open. It allows the moisture to get out. The bees produce a lot of moisture. Now when it's below 0, this will be all frost in here. These were solid frost, maybe 3/4 of an inch on both tubes up until a couple of days ago. And that comes from the moisture. Anything that breathes produces moisture. So the moisture comes out and it gets into this main box and then comes on out through those vents. And of course, fresh air goes in through these vents also. We'll take the top off, and that'll expose us to, in this case, 4 hives. The 4 hives have feeder boxes on, which is nothing more than an empty box sitting on top of the hive, and then a styrofoam cover. I won't need any patties on this. These are just sugar patties with some honeybee healthy in them and a little bit of honey. Come up and they eat it and they take it down. And that kind of supplements the honey stores from last fall. I've been beekeeping for 100 years and I've always used styrofoam covers because it allows the moisture to get out. Starvation is the biggest killer of bees in the winter if everything is right, if they've been medicated and they're healthy. And the other one is moisture, because that moisture gets up inside the hive, it's got to get out. So you need an upper entrance. This is called a nuke. It's only half a hive, it's 5 frames. That one has a marked queen, and these are carniolans in this one. All the rest of our bees are Italians. The carniolan's a much darker bee. See how dark they are compared to the Italians. This is a candy down here, and I put this on early this year. This one was loaded with honey, so they're probably down, and that's the way God designed these things to go to the bottom of the hive and then eat their way up during the year. And when they get to the top, then they're out of honey, and this supplement feeding is to ensure that I don't lose them. The winter bee has more fat cells in it, and they're designed to live longer. A regular bee, a summer bee, is good for 2 months, and they're dead and gone. So you go in with the winter, in the late fall, the bees that come out in the spring were not the ones that went in the fall. They'll all die off. But the ones with the more fat cells, they'll make it through the winter. There's no indoor plumbing, and after you've been in there for a month, you got to go. So it's called a cleansing flight, and they come out and they do their thing and they go back. Now the older bees, and that's what these are, probably the older bees that we have from last fall, they die. They've just come to the end of their life cycle, and they don't go back in. A good healthy bee can fly around for 10-15 minutes in this weather and still go back into the hive and not die. Are you ready, young man? There we go. This is 20 feet long here. I got 20 foot of rails, and I spread the bees all the way out during the summer, but then they get compressed now till when they're right tight against each other, and you have to use different roofs inside and different covers. Yep, that looks pretty good. Now some beekeepers will put candy boards down here. In other words, this hole down about this high, all across the bottom will be sugar like this, or it'll be made with like a candy where you boil it. They couldn't make it if they didn't have a fair amount of honey to start with. This is not enough to get them through the winter, but there's a lot of sugar here for them. They should be able to handle a few more weeks, because it won't be long and they'll be out flying. These are for syrup. I'll feed them syrup in another couple of weeks. As soon as we start getting into the 40s, I'll be able to put 2 jars of syrup in there. You just lay it down and put 2 jars of syrup. Now this box probably gets way warmer than my other box. The other box usually runs around 20 to 25 degrees warmer than the outside temperature, except when it gets real warm, and then there'll only be a 10-degree difference. But the heat from the escaping heat from the bees come into here and get trapped by this system. And so for the most part, surrounding these hives, it's in the 30s or low 30s all winter long. Like the one at home went down to 19.9 once when we were 19 below, and that's a huge difference. And so they're going to consume less honey. See how they turn their butts up to me and fan, because I was blowing on them. I was kind of hoping to drive them inside. I didn't want to squash any of them. So that's quite a pile of sugar there for them. Here's what a syrup feeder looks like. That jar had syrup in it. I'll just refill those. Just sugar and water. In the spring, you feed it 1 sugar to 2 waters. It's 2 sugars to 1 water in the fall. In the spring, you're feeding to stimulate and give them a little bit of food. And then, of course, it depends. If you have all new equipment and you got packaged bees, there is no food for them in the hive. These bees will come in. I'll probably have a frame or 2 of honey in each one of these come spring, so they do have a food source. And if you get some crummy days. So newbies, they need a real good source, and so you got to make sure you feed them sugar water or a syrup just to get them going. All the hives that I have together this year averaged 58 pounds of honey per hive, plus what they stored for themselves. But this one has a lot of bees in it and a lot of honey, at least it did. Probably had 110 pounds of winter honey down in there. But you move them 3 inches a day only. You don't want to move a hive 4 or 5 feet at a crack, because the bees are programmed in their minds to go back to where they took off from. Yeah, you take this off, and then I start sliding them apart a couple inches at a time. And I reverse that in the winter. You just squish them together. But you move them 3 inches a day only. You don't want to move a hive 4 or 5 feet at a crack, because the bees are programmed in their minds to go back to where they took off from. You want them apart because it stops, or it can reduce robbing. They'll steal from one another. So you want to reduce that as much as you can. And so you stagger them. I have them tipped at different angles. And I have our hives are all painted different. My thought was that it may help them identify where they belong. It eliminates drifting, which is when they go to the wrong house. So they go out here in the field and they gather some nectar and they come back to the wrong house. And sometimes that can be a real problem if too many of them drift from one box to another. You're going to weaken one, strengthen the other. And you like to keep them balanced and all growing the same, especially in the spring. Right now, each box has probably got 15,000 bees in it, and that's low. In the midsummer, when you're right at your peak, they're running around 60,000 bees, and that's how they can gather so much honey. Each one of these bees, in their lifetime of flying, they can bring in 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in their entire life. So you can imagine how many it takes to get pounds of honey. So it's important to keep each bee. I hate losing even one bee. I mean, what's nicer than that? A beekeeper gets to handle his bees in the winter. It doesn't get any better than that. Like I said, the fella in the club's been doing this for 5 years, and he hasn't bought bees in 5 years. You can see it. So far it's successful. The advantage is if I don't have to add, I'll be able to split these. I'll make 2 out of each one that's strong, or take frames out and start nukes, which is a small hive. So there's so many things you can do. I want another observation hive, and you take 2 or 3 frames of brood and a queen, and you put it in your observation hive, and voila, you got a whole hive there, and it'll take off and it'll build on itself. And it's the same way with the nuke. Put in 2 frames of honey, 2 frames of brood, and 1 empty drawn comb, and within a month, you've got a good strong hive going. So, whoops, there goes another one. Look at that. Nice. Snow falling, bees flying. Doesn't get any better than that. Must be the UP, huh?
Today's show is brought to you in part by Rapid River Knife Works, home of Michigan's largest custom knife factory showroom.
Of course, now we're into spring, and there's various skills or things that you have to do as a beekeeper depending on the season. Now we got to take this bee box off, and then going through each of the colonies to see what we have, see how strong they are, and see if the queen's laying, and readjust them and clean the hives. Whew! A little bit. Just a little calmer. Ooh, this is empty, and that's good. What they do is after, when they're ready for the queen to lay an egg, it's got to be cleaned and polished, each cell. So once it's cleaned and polished, she does an inspection on it, and then she'll go in and lay an egg. That's kind of what they're doing here. There's brood. You see the little white down in there? That's the larva. Here's sealed brood up here, and that's just larva. So we're probably getting into where she's working. I hate leaving it open like this so long. It's not good to be out too long, or they'll get chilled brood. It'll actually kill the larva. This white stuff, a lot of that is that sugar I put in. The bottom board has to be opened up and cleaned and scraped clean of dead bees. Over the winter, the last year's bees will die and they fall to the bottom. And then we call it reversing the boxes. The bottom box becomes the top box. By nature, God wants them to go up. They start at the bottom and they work their way up. In order to encourage that, I reverse the boxes. This one is syrup, and this one that is some crystallized honey. A couple weeks ago, I started putting honey on, because they don't take syrup until it gets warm out. The feeding isn't just to give them food. The feeding is stimulant. You stimulate the hive. The queen sees something's coming in, so she's more inclined to lay eggs. And right now, you want her to really be laying a lot of eggs and getting up to that 2,000 a day. Right now they're bringing in pollen, and of course there aren't any flowers blooming, so they're all coming from trees and bushes. The maple trees are a real big one for us, and they're barely opening, so that's kind of the big thing, and it's the first big push. Our second push is going to be when the dandelions come out. You can almost get a box of honey off of dandelions if you have a strong overwintered colony. Once the queen starts to realize that stuff's coming in, she starts laying that 2,000 to 2,000 plus eggs a day. She should be laying pretty good right now, even with this little bit coming in. You need the queen to start laying because the hive is going to be declining. All the older bees are going to be dying, so we have to have new bees to replace them. And with a life expectancy of 2 months, she needs to be laying that 2,000 a day in order for us to be at a 60 or 70,000 by the 1st of July. Actually here, the 1st of July is when we get not only flowers, but we also get our basswood, which is can be a very big flow here. We get lots of honey off of basswood. Clover, as everyone knows, is a high producer of nectar for honey and gives a nice honey. But one basswood tree, and we got thousands of them around here. One basswood tree is worth 2 acres of clover. It goes into a larva stage once it hatches. And the larva grows so fast. I mean, it's fed constantly. There's bees in and out 100 times a day feeding that larva. And they'll actually fill that cell. They'll go from that tiny egg, which is almost hard to see, to filling a cell, and then they cap it off, and that's called cap brood. And then that takes another 11 days, and then it hatches. And when it hatches, it eats its way out through that wax on top, goes find something to eat, and then immediately starts feeding other bees. I mean, they have this down to a science. The other thing they get from maple trees is their glue. It's called propolis. They glue everything together with propolis. I've read where they get some medicine from them too. Some people say that they have medicine chests inside the hive. So when they need medicine, they have it right there. And where the brood is. One thing you'll notice is that these are called 10 frame boxes, but I only have 9 frames in them. Makes it a little easier to get everything in and out. It doesn't seem to hurt our harvest. There's larva in this one. So she's already laying. They're sealed brood here. With the caps on, those are sealed brood. Next to them, some larvae. I don't know, I just got a feeling these queens are all laying late because of this odd winter, late drawn out spring. When you find them with their heads stuck into the cells, that means they starved to death. They ran out of food. And I had sugar patties on here, but this was a very light hive to start with. It just didn't have much in it, and that's what we got. Here's where the bulk of them ended up, right here. Look at that. And there's no food here for them. And they can't go left and right, so they could starve to death if there was honey off to the left and right, because they're designed to go up and down. Especially when it's cold. It's cold, the cluster is how they stay together, and that's where they get their heat from. Now, what we have upcoming, well, first of all, is going to be the package bees. That's the way most beekeepers get started in beekeeping, is through package bees. Thousands and thousands come out of California, Florida, and Georgia. Now, the neat part in this next one will be we're going to have a brand new beekeeper who has never done anything with bees, and he'll put in a package of bees. I'll do one first, he'll watch me, and I'll kind of talk him through the second one. You'll see how easy it is. After that, we're going to be doing a mite test. It's called a sugar roll, where you take and put bees in a glass jar with powdered sugar, and then you sprinkle some water on. It's a neat procedure. Then we'll be looking at splitting a hive. If one of these can be split, we'll split it. Then we'll go into harvesting, where we actually take the honey off and extract it. From that, we'll go into bottling and doing a little selling, and then start all over with reversing what we just did here. We'll be putting that bee box back on after we push these all together, because they'll be all spread out. So that's pretty much what we're going to do. We're going to take you through a whole season of beekeeping. And that's it for now.
"906 Outdoors" is brought to you by Race Driven, your source for premier power sports products.
I live on the western end of the UP and had a few people approach me this spring that they had considerable damage to their trees over the winter, most likely from voles. Spring Valley Lodge and Orchard had damage to over 200 trees in their apple orchard.
I mean, it could be a number of things. Voles or rabbits are a couple of culprits that will gnaw on trees in the wintertime. A lot of prey species actually, have cycles in their population. You have, population explosions, and then you have population declines, and that happens a lot in rodents and rabbits and so forth. Most people will see evidence of voles when the snow is coming off the ground. They'll see the runways in their lawns and so forth, and that's an indication you've got voles.
So what is a vole? At first glance, a vole looks like a mouse and is sometimes referred to as a field mouse, but voles have shorter tails, smaller eyes, and small rounded ears that are often hidden by their thicker fur. Still a rodent, still a pest, and apparently they eat the bark off trees and shrubs.
They're vegetarians, and they prefer grasses. But if they run out of grasses, or they are staying closer to shelter, so forth, they will gnaw on trees for nutrition as well. Well, they'll gnaw on most trees. Thicker bark trees are not as appealing as thinner bark trees, and smaller trees you're going to notice much more damage, to the point where they may have gnawed and girdled it to death. Larger trees you may not see as much damage, but they will, attack the upper roots and the lower trunks of all the trees. The bark itself doesn't have any nutrition for them, so they're trying to get into that, what we call cambio layer and vascular layer, where they're getting the nutrients and so forth.
So is there anything you can do to save your trees?
If the tree has not been girdled, that means gnawed all the way around to the vascular layer, they may come back, and in that case you really don't necessarily need to do anything to the tree. I don't recommend usually using like a wound sealer or something. That tends to actually impede the callousing of the wound. The best thing to do is to, just clean up any raw edges and hope the tree survives. But you can set up some preventative measures to keep it from happening again. You can do several things. You can do what we call habitat modification. Voles like tall grassy areas. So if you in the fall are mowing, the grass fairly short around the trees. If you have mulch around the trees, woody mulch, you want to rake that away from the base of the trees in the fall. If you have something like a gravel mulch, that actually will deter them because again, they're looking for, the grasses to eat, and the stones expose them to the open, and they have a lot of predators. You can also do exclusion, and what you use there is the plastic tree sleeves or 1/4-inch hardware cloth, and you want to bury that a few inches in the soil around the tree, and you want it to be a few inches above the snow line because they will tunnel through the snow and so forth. The hardware cloth you can find at most hardware building supply stores. And you want to use that 1/4-inch mesh. Anything larger, the voles can actually, squeeze through. And you want to have that in a cylinder that's, several inches away from the trunk because you want the trunk to be able to grow for several seasons before you have to adjust or remove it. Another habitat modification you can do is actually, make sure you have some good perch trees for your avian predators because hawks and owls really enjoy a good vole dinner. There's repellents on the market that are labeled for voles. The evidence for their effectiveness is not complete yet, and they're going to be a short-term solution. Every time it rains, you'd have to go out and spray these repellents and so forth. People can trap them if they have a small enough area. You can use things like mouse snap traps or small live animal traps if you have just a small area, small orchard or something to trap them.
Or build your own PVC vole bait station like my friend Don and Spring Valley Orchard did, and place it on the voles runway. Both have had success eradicating voles with these.